So now I'd like for us to spend a little time thinking about vocabulary and how we can best help our students gain the vocabulary that they need within the context of the Language Arts Workshop. So during the first 5 years of a child's life, they typically gain around 10,000 words in their vocabulary. After that, about 2,000 to 3,600 words per year they gain. And this is true for children who are of average income and average or above average ability. Children who are being raised in poverty and children who have learning disabilities often can gain markedly less words. They can start school with quite a lower number than 10,000 of words in their vocabulary, which naturally affects everything about their learning in the language arts. So not surprisingly, research has shown that how many words a child knows, their vocabulary knowledge, is a huge predictor of their school success. In fact, 80% of variance in reading comprehension test scores is due to vocabulary knowledge. Reading comprehension and writing composition are dependent on word knowledge, and reading and being read to is the best way to increase vocabulary. So vocabulary is simply a knowledge of words and word meanings. This is the work of a lifetime. Almost daily when we're younger, and sometimes a little bit more sporadically when we're older, we will learn new words. The components of an effective vocabulary program at the elementary school level include wide and extensive independent reading. Additionally, instruction in specific words is very important. We also need to teach our students word learning strategies that they can use independently. And having word consciousness, an appreciation for words, noticing new words, collecting new words, playing with words, are all ways that we can enhance learning and motivation for our students in the area of vocabulary. So some of the forms of vocabulary that we can think about are expressive and receptive vocabulary. As expressive vocabulary are words that we can speak or write, and receptive vocabulary are words that we can hear and understand or we can read. We also can think about vocabulary in terms of oral vocabulary and print vocabulary. So students can have various levels of knowledge for a word. They can never have seen or heard it before. It's completely unknown. They can maybe have seen the word or heard it, but they don't know what it means. Maybe they vaguely know the meaning of the word, or they know it well, they can explain it, they can use it first in speaking and eventually in their writing. That's the highest form of knowing words. So when we're thinking about the size of vocabulary and we think of word families are words that are related in meaning, like sweet, sweetness, sweetly. There are 88,500 distinct word families in printed school English. The average 12th grader knows about 40,000 of them, which is less than half. Baumeister has found that root words, there are about 17,500 root word meanings, and about 15,000 of those are well known by 12th grade, by your average student. From age 1 to 2nd grade, students typically acquire about 860 root words per year, and after that, about 1,000 per year in grades 3 through 6, which is probably due to the increased amount of learning in the content areas. If you multiply by 3 the number of root words, you will come up with around the number of words that can be derived from those roots. It makes sense for us to teach our students root words, since learning the root words can give them a way to figure out many more words. So definitely when we think about how many words a student comes to school knowing, they probably did not receive any formal direct instruction in vocabulary. So how did they learn all those words, and how do people learn words every day, both inside and outside of school? And mostly we are learning our words indirectly through everyday experiences with spoken and written language. We can learn through conversations, we can learn by being read to, we can have conversations about reading, and we can learn vocabulary through the process of reading. Additionally, we can learn through direct instruction, which is where we're looking at specific words and at word learning strategies, and we seek to develop word consciousness in our students. Now, unfortunately, I know many of you will be teaching students who are children of poverty. These students begin school with only 25% of the vocabulary knowledge that their middle and upper class peers begin school with. There are many reasons for that. Some of those reasons are that these children of poverty often have very few books in their home. They may have very few opportunities to talk with someone about books, or even just to talk with someone. Their parents very often are working at least long hours in one job, sometimes more than one job, and they're not able to, they don't have the energy when they come home to have the same kinds of conversations that a parent who is less exhausted would be able to have. Also, children of poverty aren't able to go on the trips. They're not taken to zoos. They're not exposed to many of the learning experiences that children from middle and upper class families are able to experience. So all of this affects the size of their vocabulary. So they have to play catch up when they begin school. Now, I know teachers who will assign 25 new words every week in some kind of book, a workbook, and they give their students a test over those words on Friday. They do very little direct instruction, and they wonder why those words never appear in their students' oral or written vocabularies. And that's because you cannot expect students to learn words when you teach them directly, even much more than the rate of 2 per day. And that's if you're teaching them well and giving them many opportunities to interact with those words. So you can save your students time and your time and do something else if you are using those vocabulary books, because they don't work. So when you think about which words to choose to directly teach, if you're only supposed to teach 2 per day or 10 per week, you can think of words as being in 3 tiers. You have basic words that don't typically require any instruction in school because the students have already learned those words, unless they're English language learners. You can find many of these words on the Dale Chall list, which you can Google and find. Tier 2 words are words that occur frequently and they're central to comprehension. Those are the very best candidates for direct instruction. Depending on the developmental level, you will choose words from this tier to teach. They're words such as credible, current, diverted, sifted. All of those would be words at the Tier 2 level. Tier 3 words are low frequency words. They're specialty words from the content areas, and you only need to teach those as they arise. Typically, in science and social studies and math, you're going to have many new vocabulary words to teach students. You need to recognize that the vocabulary words are central to their comprehension, and you're going to have to do a great deal of instruction in teaching the vocabulary in order for them to understand the concepts that you're trying to teach in that content. So how do we go about teaching vocabulary well? We must focus on having rich and robust instruction. One of the most important things you can do is contextualize. You must talk to students about the words that you want them to learn. You need to help them place those words within some sort of context that they can hang the word on. You scaffold their learning by helping them relate the word to something that they do know. A technique called text talk is where you briefly during reading will define words, and after reading you can talk about the words at length, and over 4 readings students can absorb about 25 words because you're giving them rich and robust instruction. In independently read text, you would want to introduce the words before they read. When you're introducing specific words, please don't send your students to the dictionary and have them look up long lists and write down definitions. Often they don't even know which definition to choose from. The teacher needs to go over the meanings of the words with the students and come up with student-friendly explanations with the students, creating context, and let them actively engage with words. One of the best ways to do this is with an academic word wall, which we'll be talking about in just a little bit. You want them to develop in-depth word knowledge, how to use the word, what are the different facets of word meanings, and to think about relationships among words. If you're doing this in a setting where there's lots of rich discussion about the words and what they mean, you can easily facilitate the learning of new words. So a very effective teaching procedure is very simple. Basically, you can write the word or have the word, show the students where the word is on the academic word wall that you've created in your classroom, and you describe the word and how it's generally used. You explain how it's used in everyday language, and you invite the students to help you explain the word. Let them make up sentences and raise their hand and tell you the sentences. This is one of the most effective ways for students to learn new words. Now, word walls, we can have word walls that are to teach high-frequency words, and we can also have walls that are to help us teach our students what I always refer to as big words, academic words, and you can focus your students' attention on core content words. And as for example, in my when I taught science to my students, I would go through my chapters ahead of time and make cards for each chapter. Every section of the chapter, I would write down the bold words, the vocabulary words, on long strips of the largest size of index card that were cut into strips. I did every section in a different color, and I would post those on the wall, and then I would have my students manipulate those words, talk with those words. I would introduce them before we read. We would refer to them while we were reading and while I was teaching, and then afterwards I would have the students have discussions using those words, and I would have them do quick writes where they wrote using those words. Afterwards, I would take up their quick writes, go home, read through them, select 2 or 3 of the best ones, and the next day when it was time to teach the next section of the chapter, I would read those quick writes and praise the students' good use of their vocabulary and their good summarization of the concepts from that section of the text. So remember, you can have 2 types of word walls: high-frequency word walls, which are words that are the most frequently written words that students are likely to misspell. It's like a readily accessible dictionary on the wall. Those high-frequency word walls are important at all grade levels, and I always had one in my classroom, but I always also had a big word wall. I had a section for the vocabulary words from my Pathways book, a section for the vocabulary words from my science book, another section for the social studies book, and another from math and sometimes from Bible. And I would use those quick writes at the end of my teaching and our reading together to have the students kind of integrate and access their knowledge of the words and use them immediately to gel the meanings within their minds. So this is an example of a high-frequency word wall, and it's not a big word wall, but if we're going to do a word wall, not have one, but just do a word wall, that means that we're going to refer to the word wall. For example, if a student comes to you and says, I forgot how to spell favorite, is this right? And they show you their spelling. You might say, remember, we learned that word last week. It's on our high-frequency word wall. Could you go look in the section that might help? What letter would it be under? And the students can use a word wall in that way. Every Monday I would introduce 5 new words on my high-frequency word wall, and we would pronounce the word, and then we would spell the words out loud together. We would snap the words and clap the syllables in the words and just do various things to manipulate the words and call attention to tricky parts for spelling. So important things to remember when you're doing a word wall is to make the words large enough to be seen anywhere from around the room. I like to cut around the shapes of the letters because that helps students in the visual parts of their brains be able to access the words better. You should only do 5 new words per week on your high frequency word wall. You can do more on your academic word wall. But when you're doing the high frequency word wall, do only 5 and do none that start with the same letters so they don't confuse them. You introduce them and you practice them, and then all week long you can refer back to them. You can play games with them when you're lining up. You can, if you have a 2-minute time while you're waiting on, say, the art teacher to come to your room, you can use those. And what I did is I always held my students, except those who might have a pretty severe learning disability, I held them accountable for those words. If the word was on the high frequency word wall, they were expected to spell it correctly every time in their writing. If they did not, I would circle it and write WW. They knew that that meant they had to correct the spelling on their paper and write the word 10 times on the back of their paper. So these are some examples of games that could perhaps be played with your academic word wall. I'm not going to go over all of those, but you can find many examples of games on the internet for playing with your word wall. Another excellent way for students to learn about vocabulary is to have them doing semantic maps, where they're connecting concepts in their minds and on their papers. These semantic maps can be used with almost any topic, and they're highly effective. A semantic feature analysis is where you would have students make a list and they can put a plus or a minus for the various features. I love doing these with science. Here's an example using dinosaurs. For example, the T-Rex is a carnivore, so the T-Rex would have a plus in that column. Is the T-Rex bipedal? If so, you would put a plus here, but if it walks on 4 legs, you would put a plus here. So you can see how these would be a good way for students to organize their knowledge and review and think about concepts within their content. So here are 2 examples of word maps. Word maps have been shown by research to be a highly effective way for students to practice. If you have a student take a note card and they can write the word, a definition, a sentence, and an example. Sometimes you can have them draw a picture as is shown in the bottom left, or you can have them do an antonym or a synonym. All of these are good ways for them to be making connections in their minds with what they already know to learn new words.